I assume most of you joined us for part one or watched it on demand. In this workshop, it's going to take about 60 more minutes. We're going to go ahead and complete the AWS exercise with Keatron Evans. Let's go ahead and just remind everyone about this lab environment. So we are Infosec Institute. We have the Infosec Skills platform with these great labs in there, as well as AWS Boot Camps. So for today's exercise, we have this lab in the freemium tier of our Infosec Skills platform. So as long as you have a free account or an existing Infosec Skills account, you should be able to access it. If you don't have an account, it takes 30 seconds. All you need to do is put in your name, email, password, and you can create a free account. You should be able to access that lab. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Keatron, and he can take over the screen share and walk us through the rest of this lab.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. So we kind of went through a lot of basics in the first half of this. Like I talked about the basics of like what AWS actually is. We did some artwork on the screen where I kind of drew out an architectural breakdown of like, here's what it looks like. Here's how your part of it fits in. If you subscribe to AWS services or you're using the services, talked about what a virtual private cloud is. We talked about what an S3 bucket is. We built an S3 bucket. We looked at how to put stuff in there, including a web page or whatever it is. But in this second half, we're going to get a little more advanced. I'm going to go into kind of like more of a real world scenario. And I'm going to have you spend the majority of the first half of this just watching me do it. I want it to be more interactive this time because, again, we're getting into more advanced stuff. And since this is recorded, I'm going to encourage you to focus more on absorbing what I'm doing and asking questions and stuff like that so that you can then go back later and go at your own speed and complete these exercises. Because I think if you watch what I'm doing and it starts to sink in of what's going on, and then you go back and do it at your own speed, I think you're going to see something special happen with your understanding of cloud and AWS. And I think it's going to open you up to explore more and learn more on your own. And most importantly, set you up to future-proof you to where now cloud becomes an enablement of AI, because we're planning to do a series of, using AWS to learn and deploy generative AI solutions and to even create generative AI solutions. But you kind of need these basics that we're doing here before you can fully take advantage of something like that. So what we're going to be doing today is I promised you in the first half that I would show you how, like a quick way to get a website up and running. And we did that with S3. We created a HTML page, put it in there, or just could put a text document in there. And you can browse to that. You can share it with people. You can share it with certain people. Like there's all kinds of stuff you can do with how you put it there. But now I'm going to take another approach and show you a more traditional way and introduce you to another concept called EC2. And I think we got introduced to it before, but I'm going to steal the share. And I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So what you see is my Amazon AWS console. Now, again, I'm not going to go back through the basics like we did before, where like how to get into AWS, how to get into the lab environment. If you are coming in for the first time and you missed the first half, you're going to need to go back and watch the first half to know how to get into the AWS, get into the account and that type of thing, because I didn't want to waste the precious time that we have together in here repeating everything that we did in the first one, right? So you really need to, if you are new, go back and watch the first one and then come back and follow along with this one after we're done with it. But you still should stay, because you're still going to learn the same things as if you had never. This doesn't matter if you've been in the first one or not. You're going to learn the concepts and learn what it is you're supposed to do, so that when you go back and put the first piece together, this piece will just make even more sense. Okay. So what are we going to do here? Let's kind of look at and talk about the infrastructure just a little bit more. So we talked about how AWS, we drew a big box that said, this is Amazon Web Services. It's a virtual representation of hundreds of thousands of data centers that are spread out around the world in different regions and different parts of the world. We represent it, visually with this box. And in that box, we can put in our own little box, which becomes our virtual private cloud. So that is your network inside Amazon's network, which means you could be sitting on any one of their data centers around the world. You could be sitting on multiple data centers, right? For redundancy's sake and all of those types of things. These are all things that you get as an advantage of using cloud services. Now, what we're going to do is inside that virtual private cloud, because we created an S3 bucket outside of that earlier, but what we're going to do now is we're going to create an EC2 instance, which is essentially a virtual machine that we're going to stand up inside AWS, okay? Then we're going to give ourselves access securely to, or let's say relatively securely, to that cloud EC2 instance. And we're going to go into that thing and configure it as a web server. And then we're going to have to go and look at something called security groups. We played with security groups a little bit the last time, but now I'm going to go into it and show you how we need to open up ports in there to make it to where we can actually browse to this web server. Okay. Now, again, I encourage you now, if you already have some AWS experience and you know how to navigate, you can go with me. But I'm going to encourage you, especially if you're new to this or you just joined for the first time last week, I'm going to challenge you to try a different method. Try just watching me and sending questions in chat and then going back and doing it on your own after. Because what happens sometimes as we get into more advanced topics, if you're trying to follow along with me, as I do it, you end up missing key connectors, key points, and things like that in your understanding. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm just going to go to EC2, which is what you see on the screen now. And I'm going to say launch instance. Okay. And what that's telling AWS is you want to create a new virtual machine or EC2 instance in one of your virtual private clouds. And you can actually choose which VPC you put it in if you have multiple virtual private clouds. For example, in my real AWS accounts, this is not a real one. This is just one, or it's a real one, but it's one that I use for just training and teaching people how to do it. But in my real business ones, I have hundreds of VPCs that are designated for different things, right? There may be some that's designated to study and understand and reverse engineer malware so that we can do that safely. There may be some that's actually used for other businesses purposes, like hosting web servers and hosting databases and things like that for us to interact with customers. And then there may be some that's just there to just host very large databases and do vectorization work and AI types of things as well, right? So there's different VPCs that you can have for different things, and you can connect them together with virtual routers and virtual gateways and NAT gateways and things like that, just as you would in a real physical environment, okay? So with this instance, I'm going to say, all right, it says, okay, what do you want to name this thing? I'm going to name it, let's just call it Webinar Hoot, okay? And what type of operating system do I want this machine to be? I'm going to go with just Windows. Okay. Now, again, it's important that you're watching everything that I do here, because when you go back and do this on your own, you're going to want to pause and think and hear everything that I'm saying here again in the context of you doing it. And I'm doing it that way just so that you have time to go through it at some point. So with the Windows instance, when I pick that, I have some other things to decide here. Like, what type of Windows do I want? What version of Windows? How many processors? How big do I want those processors to be? How much memory do I want to allocate? What size hard drive do I want to use? All of those are things that I want to have to decide. Now, one thing it's good for you to do as a new person doing this is you always want to try to opt for the free tier eligible things, right? When you're picking a image or a Windows OS or a Linux OS, try to look for the free tier eligible ones because it's less likely that you might accidentally incur charges and things like that if you're using free tier eligible virtual machines. That's not to say you can't do something jacked up and cause yourself to get some inadvertent charges, but it makes it much less likely, okay, if you're using free tier eligible. All right. The other thing is the instance type. It could be a micro instance. This one, for example, has 2 CPUs, 1 gigabyte of memory. That falls on the free tier. And one of the things I want to kind of point out here, because I do like to make these webinars, have an education aspect to it. So if you look at the options, they seem to be endless. And I want to just show you the extremes that we can go to here. So if you look at, let's just look at this one right here. So this virtual machine right here that I've got the cursor around, this thing has 192 CPUs and nearly 3 terabytes of memory. So let me repeat that. 192 CPUs, that's processors, and 4 terabytes, not 4 gigabytes, 4 terabytes of memory. That's 4,000 gigabytes of memory that you can spec here. Think of the fast computing and the processing that you can do with 192 CPUs. So somebody asked, okay, what would you use that for? Okay, I'll give you a use case. A lot of times I'll build instances like this. Let's just say I'm processing a forensics image, right? To where a lawyer or somebody in the world of security has given me a forensically sound hard drive image of a suspect drive. Let's say that drive is a terabyte in size, and they want me to analyze that drive for evidence in whatever kind of case it is. The most powerful machine I can probably build locally is it's going to be hard to build one with a terabyte of memory locally. If I do build it, that thing's going to cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's just not worth it. So using a computer, let's just say with 64 gigs of RAM or 128 gigs of RAM, 4 quad processors that of the latest, greatest speed, it might take me a week and a half to 2 weeks to properly forensically process and analyze that hard drive image, because it's going to take me a couple of days just for the image to be indexed into the operating system and into that forensic software, whether it be FTK, Encase, whatever. It's going to take it a while to index it properly in there before I can start analyzing. Well, guess what? If I built this big baby and I bought that image in the AWS and imported it in, I can now do that same case in like 2 days versus 2 weeks. So if you think about that now, I can offer premium service to lawyers, law enforcement, intelligence, whoever we're working for on this case, and say, look, if you want the standard 2-week turnaround, we can do that at the regular price. But if you want to pay 20% more, we can get this to you by Friday. Today's Wednesday, we can get it to you by Friday. And it'll just cost you 20% more. Now, because I know one of the questions that's going to come from some of you is, man, if you build that server and it's running that much RAM and that much processor, your AWS fees have to be through the roof. They're pretty high, but it still allows me to make a big profit, if I'm charging 20% premium over what my base fee is for, doing whatever it is we're doing in there. So those are the kinds of things, the economics that you think about when you spec these big, powerful machines like this. But the point I wanted to show you is that you can spec it. So you can go in here and get as much compute power as you could possibly want. And the beauty of it is if I were to build a big machine like that locally and spend, $500,000 on it, I am married to that $500,000 cost. If I build this thing and it tells me it's going to cost me $100 an hour and I only need it for 8 hours, guess what? I'm only paying $800 to get the same processing, RAM, and compute power without having to marry it. Okay. So you need to start thinking about that concept as you think about cloud services. Rapid elasticity is one of the 5 principles that make up cloud. And what I just gave you is an example of how you can rapidly expand your capabilities up if you need to, and only pay for the time that you need it. Because when you don't need all of that resource anymore, you can shut all of this down, and now you're only paying for whatever the minimum is you had up before that. Okay. So those concepts I want you to get baked in as you think about going forward and learning and expanding in this. And again, I felt it important to go over these lessons in part 2 because I don't want you running off too afraid to use it because you think you're going to run up charges, or I don't want you to run off and be not afraid enough and get yourself a $100,000 bill on your very first AWS account on month 1, right? So I'm being conscious of those things and making sure I cover those bases for you, to where you can kind of, see what you're doing here. All right. Yeah, don't forget to turn off these instances, correct. And I'll go over all that in the end because I am going to actually shut them down when I finish demoing this to you. All right, so what I'm going to go with, I'm just going to go with 4 CPUs and 16 gigs memory. This would be plenty for what I'm going to demonstrate here. All right, now, here's another important teaching part. So when I create this machine, it's going to generate an administrator account and it's going to give it a password. Okay. Now, what I would like Amazon to do is when it creates that password is encrypt it in a way that only I can decrypt it. How could we do that? Well, there's something called asymmetric cryptography that most of you probably heard of. What that means is we have a private key and a public key. They're mathematically related. I won't get into the math of that, but just know that anything that's encrypted with your private key can only be decrypted with the public key. And anything that's encrypted with your public key can only be decrypted by your private key. And generally what happens is you only ever give out your public key to the world so that anybody in the world can encrypt something and send it to you. And then you have the only private key copy, means you're the only one that can decrypt it. So we're going to utilize that here. I'm going to create a key pair, RSA, and I'm going to just name it webinar hoot, just like we named the machine. And I'm going to say create key pair. Now notice up here in the top right, what happened is it actually downloaded that private key to my machine. And it gave AWS a copy of my public key. So this is important to note because if you lose this key or you delete it or something like that, you will not be able to recover ever the password to this machine that we're about to create. Okay. So whenever you download this private key, this PIM, make sure you keep it in a secure location and have a backup copy of it so that you can always go back and get it in case the machine blows up or something like that. Okay. Now, we talked last week or last month, or whenever we did the first half of this, about security groups. There's a default security group that's being created for this VM, and it's because of the VPC or the virtual private cloud that I'm putting it in. It has a default security group attached to it. That security group by default enables RDP to this VM. Okay. Now it enables it from anywhere. If I wanted, I could come in here and put in my IP address as the only IP that's allowed to this VM. Not going to do that because it takes a little more time, and this is just a demo. But this is where you do that. And you don't even have to try to find out what your public IP is. All you got to do is hit the drop down, and it'll show my IP, and it'll show what your current public IP address is. You know, like right now, mine is this. Don't care if anybody sees it, because by the time this webinar airs, I will not have that public IP address anymore. Okay. Then down under storage, it's going to ask me how big do I want the drive to be. Again, we're not doing anything major, so I'm just going to go with 500 gig. You do have the option to specify things like the type of drive. You know, some of these drives are provisioned for going very fast and doing things like database lookups and high compute, you know, capability things. And some of these are just for standard old generic storage and meant for that purpose. Now, if I wanted, I could create or add another volume. And this volume, notice, has more options that I'm able to select for it, because this first volume, which is my root volume, is limited in the types of drives you could make it be. All right. So I'm going to remove that one because we don't need it. I just wanted to show you that you can keep creating volumes up to whatever size you want. All right. Those are the basics. We've picked the machine. We've picked the key for it. We've given it the size that we want. We make sure the security group allows us to RDP to it. So now I'm simply going to go ahead and launch the instance. And this is AWS creating, provisioning, and then spinning up or standing up that virtual machine. And it is right here. So I can click this link and go right to this VPC and see all of the information about it. Okay. I can see that it has a public IP address, which is 44211.71156. I can see that it's running currently. I can see which virtual private cloud it's a part of. I could even go down and change the virtual private cloud if I wanted to move it to another VPC that I own, right? All these things are here in that instant dashboard. But what I'm going to focus on now is, how do we connect to that instance and manage it? And this is where the public and private key is going to come in again. So I'm just going to say connect. All right. I'm going to connect via Microsoft RDP. Now I'm running a MacBook, but I do have an RDP client. And then I'm going to download the RDP file. All right. And then how do you connect to something with RDP? You connect to it via hostname or IP address. But when you connect, you have to have a admin or a terminal user, username and password. Now we know there's an administrator account. So let's go ahead and try to do this. We see there's an administrator account there, but how do we get the password to log in? Right? So I'm going to say get password. And it's still finishing out the last pieces of building the VM. So we got to be a little patient there. Now it says up to 4 minutes, but see, there you go. It never takes that long. So now that I click get password, it's saying, all right, great. I'm happy, sir, to give you the password, but the password that I have has been encrypted with your public key. Even I can't decrypt it for you, but you can decrypt it by applying your private key to this encrypted password that's encrypted with your public key. So if you supply that private key, you can decrypt it, and now you have the password. So I have to then put in my private key, which, remember, only exists on my machine. Okay, let's move the Zoom thing all the way there. And by bringing that private key in, I can now say decrypt. Oh, let me do that the right way again here. So what you saw it do there is now it decrypted and said, hey, here's the password to that machine right now. So I've already downloaded the RDP file. Let me go and connect to that RDP instance. And then it asked me for the password, and I paste it from right down here. And now it's connecting me to that VM, and let me just share that with you. I'll share the entire screen for now. So this is where we were. We hit connect, and now via RDP, it connected to that server with the username and password that we entered. So great, we built an EC2 instance in one of our default VPCs. Now we've stood up that machine. So this is we actually have, let me just draw it out really quickly to remind you of what we have now. So we have created, if this big green box represents AWS, so inside AWS, we've created our own little VPC. And inside our VPC, we've created a virtual machine that can access the internet, and the internet can access it, except for that security group is only allowing traffic to port 3389 for RDP. That's why I'm able to sit here where I'm sitting right now, which is not at AWS. I'm sitting out in the wild somewhere at a hotel. This is why I'm able to, via RDP, come out from the scary internet through AWS right into this VPC that I own, right to that virtual machine, which is what you're looking at here, is the desktop of that machine. Okay. So now what we're going to do is on that machine, because nothing else can get to it, right? Like, we're going to now build a web server and build a web page on this machine and figure out how to give ourselves access to it. And that's what we want to accomplish. That's our minimum, our MVP for today. Right? So let's look at how to do that. First, let us go ahead and build the website. So I'm going to go into Server Manager. And again, this is just Windows, right? But part of the challenge is people want to learn cloud and cybersecurity and AI. The challenge is, and the thing that nobody tells you is, like, you got to learn small pieces of lots of other supporting things, right? So even though we're building a web server in AWS, the path that we're taking is you still have to know a little bit of Windows or a little bit of Linux if you want to build a Linux web server to do that successfully, except if you want to do it serverless, but that's a more advanced topic that we'll cover some other time. So I'm going to now, inside here, go to the local server first, because I want to turn off the enhanced IE security, just because I'm going to use that browser to do some configuration stuff in a minute. Then I'm going to go back to dashboard and say add roles and features. And I'm just going to next again. And the feature that I want to add is a web server or IIS. I do want the supporting features, so I'll leave those selected and say add features. Right? Shows me that I've selected and added that role. I'm going to now say next. I'm going to say next again for the supporting features. And next, I'm agreeing to all that. And then I'm just going to say install. So now what Windows is doing is it's installing and configuring the IIS web service, which basically makes this Windows Server also a web server. Now, once we finish this, you're going to see you still won't be able to access the web page that we create because that security group is still blocking at the machine level anything from coming in other than stuff coming to port 3389, which is the port we're connected to now. And if you don't know what a port is and what blocking a port is, that's just like some security plus cybersecurity basic 101 stuff you need to go and look up. And we got plenty of that stuff on our website, in our skills platform that you're in now. If you're looking at the AWS lab that we stood up there, all of that stuff was in there. Just go back and look at some of the basics. I wouldn't even say go back and take the whole classes. If you don't know what a port is, just go look at like the security plus and network plus prep stuff, like some of the beginner stuff, and it'll get you up to speed within 30 minutes to where you understand what that is. All right. So this is installing. And while it's installing, I want to remind you of the security groups. We have a security group set up, but it's only allowing traffic to port 3389, which allows RDP traffic into this machine. So while we're going to build a web server and a web service, it still won't be accessible to you until we configure the security groups. And I'm going to do that for you. And I'll have you prove it to me that it works. So first, I'm going to close this because it says it finished. I'm going to go into the IIS directory. So this is, again, teaching you the quick, dirty way to build a website in Windows IIS. I'm going to go to C, inet pub, www root, and I'm just going to put in here a new text document. I'm going to open that document, and I'm just going to say in there, welcome to Keatron's AWS intro. Cloud is the gateway. Something nice and corny like that, right? Some feel good thing. So I'll say that. I'm just going to save this as all files. And I'm just going to name it, just do the default index.html. Save that. And now I'm going to test to see if it's functioning like a web server just by opening Internet Explorer or Edge or whatever they're calling it these days. And I'm simply going to type in localhost, because if the web server is functioning properly, then I should see that web page that we created. And we can see that it does show up as localhost. You know, welcome to Keatron's AWS. So that works. Now, here's the thing, though. Can you all access it? So let me give you the public IP address, and you tell me, I'm going to let you tell me if you can access this thing or not. The public IP address is right up here in the right corner. It is 44 211.71.156. I'll put that in chat for you. It is 44.211.71.156. All right, and remember, 44.211.71.156. So if you try to browse that, you should get nothing, right? And if I go out and I try to browse to it, I'm also going to get nothing. So let me just show that to you. Which of these tabs am I brave enough to expose to you all? 44.211.71.156. So it's just going to spin like nothing's going to load. Great. Let's figure out why. So if I go back to my AWS console, we talked about it's a security group thing. So if I go to my security groups for this instance, right? Like if I go back to the instance, all of its details are down here. And the one I'm worried about is security. And if I look at the security group that it's part of, I click that, I can now see the rules. And we did some of this in the first half. So for those of you that were in the first webinar, first half of this, security group should not be a completely new concept to you, right? But if we look at what we have here, we can see that, you know, there's inbound rules and RDP is the only thing allowed in. So what do we need to do to change that to allow stuff to port 80? Well, we need to edit the inbound rules. And then I'm going to add a rule. And in that rule, I'm going to say allow HTTP. And let's just do from anywhere IPv4 for now. And I'm going to add a rule for HTTPS. Anywhere for now. I'm going to save said rules. And now I'm going to go back out and try to browse to that IP again. And I want all of you to try to browse to that IP again. And you tell me what you get. It should load. All right. So now let's pause for a second. Think about the implications. If you can just do this, if you can just do this part that I just did, if you can go back, get the first half of this webinar, work through those basics of getting into the environment, all that, and then you can add to that the ability to do this, you can start to actually build out an enterprise. But more importantly, when people ask me, how would I go about building out a cyber somewhere for me to practice? If I wanted to practice cybersecurity things, I wanted to practice this or that, how would I build out a lab for that? What I always tell people now, universally, is don't go and buy a bunch of equipment and put it in your house. Just build yourself a lab in AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google so that you can actually play with that. Right? That allows you to not only learn how to build out a network or build out an environment, but it also allows you to do it in a way that you are actually learning cloud technologies. Okay. So now, how do we undo all that? Well, I'm just going to go to EC2, go to instances. I've got a few running there. The one that we just did was webinar Hoot. I'm just going to select it. Come over here to instance state and say terminate, in parentheses, delete instance. And it asks me some questions. Are you sure you want to terminate? Yes, I am. Termination protection, that's disabled. So I haven't turned that on, so I can go ahead and terminate this instance. And you can see now the status is it's shutting down. And I'm just going to go ahead and do that for these other two as well. All right, now refresh. And now you can see all those instances are gone. And you will not be able to get to any of them because they don't exist anymore. Right? So that's the cap. That's the finality of what we started in the first half. And what I would encourage you all to do is like go through and do all these things in sequence over and over and over again until you can do it without looking at like instructions or anything like that, like I just did, right? The first half, I walked you through the guided lab to show you how to use our instructions. This half, I just did it from memory because I wanted you to see like where you want to get to is where if somebody says, stand me up a web server and make it so that people can reach it, or stand me up an RDS database or do whatever, you can do that without looking at a step-by-step guide. I promise you, if you practice and practice, get yourself dug in that way, spend like a couple hours a week doing that, a month or two from now, you'll be proud of what you see, and I think you will progress yourself to somewhere you might not have thought you could get to. And more importantly, you're setting yourself up, you're future-proofing, and you set yourself up to, as these new cloud technologies come out, as the AI race continues to run out of control, remember, a big part of that is happening within cloud services. Make no mistake about it. So as you start to do that more and more, you will understand that this is the best route for you, no matter if you're going AI, cyber, whatever the case may be. All of it is going to eventually live in a cloud service somewhere. And I think when I just described rapid elasticity and all those things, I think it becomes apparent why that's the case. All right. Any questions? I want to leave time for questions before we end this.
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I guess while we wait to see if anyone has any specific questions about AWS or cybersecurity careers or whatever's on your mind. I can talk a little bit about our AWS Boot Camp. So yeah, we have these different AWS Boot Camps. I think we started partnering with AWS probably about a year and a half ago for these boot camps. I know the solutions architect in particular has already become one of our most popular boot camps, but we have system ops administrator, DevOps engineer, security as well. Those are the four main ones that we offer, and we have some other exciting AWS partnership things coming up that we'll be announcing in the future as well. So if you enjoy this training and you want to learn more about AWS, maybe we could just take 60 seconds and explain like what these different roles are.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of like the foundational technical AWS cert is a solutions architect associate. So basically everything that we just did from a hands-on standpoint falls within the realm of the solutions architect associate, right? The solutions architect professional basically is a higher level to where you're architecting AWS solutions. The solutions architect associate is you're a little more in the weeds and you're doing the pieces that an architect has actually put together, right? So that's what the solutions architect associate exam is. That is also the very first one that the very first, AWS cert that I got. Now I've got about 8 AWS certs now. I've got the machine learning expert one, several other AI ones, the solutions architect professional, the security specialization and expert, and also a few more DevOps. And I can't remember all of the ones, but I've got a few of them. And with the DevOps, the SysOps is really just about, if you think about becoming a certified cloud network and desktop operator, right? Like that's really what that one is. The DevOps engineer is more around you learning how to code out solutions in AWS to replace operations. So think about taking your traditional network and operating environment, making it into app-based, network, virtual networks and infrastructure as a service and building on all of these cloud native functionalities without having physical infrastructure. That's what you get into with DevOps engineering. You're actually responsible for developing cloud native applications in the environment, but also supporting your non-cloud native apps as you move them as they live in the cloud environment as well. So a very growing field, it's a very in-demand area. Like developers that actually know cloud native app development and know AWS are very much in high demand. So if you already have development experience, that DevOps engineer professional one is a ideal target certification or boot camp for you to transition your dev skills or your ops skills into a new cloud-based career. Okay. And I've already talked about security specialization, securing AWS environments. How do you pen test it? How do you, set up firewalls like WAFs and things like that? What security services are available to you? How should you architect them? How do you verify that they're doing what they're supposed to do? Like it's all taken, again, if you're a cybersecurity expert, how do you transfer that knowledge to a cloud environment? And that's what the security cert, the AWS security specialist is about.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat, so we'll just take a few minutes to go through those. Juanita's asking, I think she's wondering if you can move an instance from like a free tier to another tier. If you've already created, you say you already have one created, would it be better to like build it out as a new instance, or can you simply just move it?
Yeah, you can definitely move instances around. You can even, for example, like let's say I have an AWS account and Jeff has an AWS account. I can actually move my instance to his account. We just have to agree to that and coordinate it. Or I could give him a copy of my instance and he can put it into his account. Yeah, you can definitely move them around to wherever you want them to be. But the free tier really just specifies that, like, if you can, this thing's going to be configured with these level of services. And as long as you stay within those levels, it's going to be free. That's what the free tier means. I do see a question about licenses for OSs. That's baked into your cost. So if you stand up servers and things, your cost of operating in AWS, the licensing is baked into that. Now, if you're an enterprise, there's several routes you can go with that for different OSs and applications like Cisco and Splunk and others. You can do something called BYOL or bring your own license. So if you already have like an enterprise Splunk license, for example, you can bring that license to AWS and you can implement cloud-based Splunk using that license that you already have. So that would be for individuals, the answer is pretty easy. The charge is baked into your hourly cost of using AWS. For enterprises, it depends on how you want to go about architecting your solution.
Yeah, I see two more questions. Deb's asking, as a security focus, do you have to be so broadly certified? Yeah, I guess just if you're considering security, any recommendations for?
I think at this moment, it helps some. But I also think the industry is taking a shift to where, being able to verify and prove your skills is going to matter more. But for right now, yes, you do need some certs, because here's the thing, like you could view it as unfortunate or however you want to view it, but a lot of HR systems and things like that will automatically prune you out of the running for a job if you don't have some of these certs. I mean, that on some level, that's not great. But on the other level, like if you're getting, like I'm interviewing for some roles now, and I'm getting hundreds of apps a day for some of these roles, and I can't possibly go through them all. So now it comes down to what things can we use to differentiate these candidates, right? So I'm sensitive to that on the employer side, but also as someone that's a lifelong learner, lifelong educator, mentor, I get the frustration of if you don't have all these certs, you don't even get considered for a job. But for right now, for today, you kind of have to play into that a little bit. But I promise you there are some things coming on the horizon that's going to change a lot of that.
Yeah, it looks like the last question from Robert, just talking about how we accessed it via the IP, asking about, if there's a DNS name or something you can use instead of the IP.
Yeah, there was an actual DNS name. So to access the environment via RDP, there's a DNS name. If I wanted to, Robert, make that web server available via a DNS name, I would have to go into AWS. Here, let me just show you. We still got 7 minutes. So I would have to go into AWS, and there's a service called Route 53. Route 53 is the domain naming service. So it's just like Network Solutions or any other register. So in here, I would have to pick a domain name that's not already taken by someone, right? Or a DNS name if I wanted to do that. Let's just say, Keatron and Jeff webinar.com, right? I'm pretty sure nobody has that. So I could register that domain here through Route 53, associate that domain with the IP address that you guys are browsing to, publish it in Route 53, and within like a few minutes, it'll start propagating across the internet. And then you could get to that same server by going to keatronandjeffswebsite.com. Right. I'm pretty sure that's what you were asking, right, Robert?
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, it's a very quick process. It used to, because the way you used to have to do stuff like that is you have to build your web server one place, do security and firewall things somewhere else, then go to like a third-party network solutions or Big IP or GoDaddy or Rackspace or somewhere like that, do the DNS registration, wait 24 hours for it to propagate. Like it used to be a very long drawn out thing. Now it's like you can do all of it within a few minutes. I mean, everything I just showed you all, you can do in 5 minutes. It's just that I was going at a rate to kind of teach it to you that made it take a while. It does handle private DNS. Jeff and Casey will provide the link to the first recording. Casey just popped it in there.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll wait just a minute, see if anyone pops another question. I guess one thing I'd want to call out is we've been doing more of these workshops. We did an ethical hacking one with Keatron earlier this year that was really popular. Now we've done this cloud one. I think Keatron, as he alluded to, we're talking about doing, kind of an AI LLM one in the future. So yeah, would love your feedback. If there's certain workshops that you would like, feel free to reach out, email me, reach out to Keatron, let us know, because we're going to try to do more of them. Obviously, we want you to take our boot camps. It's how we make money. We want you to sign up for Infosec Skills, but we also want to, really support the community and make sure that it's something that you want before, you spend the money on something like a boot camp. But with that, I think that's a wrap. Any parting words of wisdom, Keatron?
Yeah, I'll just say thank you all for giving me this time with you. Like don't ever underestimate how much I value, appreciate, and am indebted to you for giving me this hour of time. Like I know time is hard to come by these days, so I greatly appreciate you sharing this time with me. Hopefully y'all see you again in another webinar or see you in our product at some point using it. And the most important parting thing I'd say is go out there, keep learning, keep practicing, try to get as much hands-on as you can, and don't stop learning. That is the most important thing. The minute you stop, it becomes easier to not learn and you start to get behind. So go out there, knock it out, and hopefully when I see you again, you'll all be AWS masters.
Awesome. Well, yeah, appreciate you all for coming, and we will see you with our next webinar or workshop. Have a great day, everybody.